Good day, good day. Nice to see you students. How's everything going? How's everyone doing? Nice to be with you again. Today's subject is really quite interesting. I've sort of mentioned to you, sometimes directly, sometimes in passing, that there's some people that are very influential on American history that most Americans don't know about. For example, one of them I talked about was John Locke. He was one of the original philosophers. He was the British philosopher. Later in this course, I'm going to talk about Adam Smith, a Scottish economist. They were both sort of before the Revolutionary War. The subject matter today, the person I'm going to talk about today, is another person I think that is someone who had a little bit of influence on American history, even though his contribution was sometime after the Revolution, as you can see his dates that he was alive. His name is Alexis de Tocqueville. He was a Frenchman. He's having a bit of a revival of popularity, I think, in the last sort of, I don't know, maybe 20 plus years, in particular political circles of the United States politique, if you will. He's famous for a book. Let's just sort of go through this here, and you can see the book. I have it right there. I'll get to that in a moment. He was, I guess I would call him a French philosopher. I'm not going to call him a philosophe like I called the four guys we talked about before when we talked about the French Revolution itself. So I'm just going to call him a philosopher, and he's most famous as an author. His most famous book is this one right here. It is called Democracy in America. And this Frenchman, he traveled to the United States, and he basically toured around the United States with some companions, some French, some American, for almost 2 full years. And he really tried to not just go to the big cities and go to the places of establishment. He tried to get out into the countrysides and out into the areas of the United States that maybe somebody of an aristocratic type thought process may not necessarily try to see. So he is complimented for that. You can see the years he did that. You know, he's pretty much a younger guy when he does that. When he gets home, he basically writes a book. Like I said, gave you the title. And one of the things, and this is sort of I think a theme of American history, is that we sort of saw this when we studied the French Revolution and the discussion of the estates, social class system of France. Really, in European society, the situation you were born into, the social class you were born into, is basically what you did. You didn't necessarily get to write your own story. You didn't get to write the chapters of your own book of life. The United States was different, and that's the establishment of the United States, and this desire to be judged by your accomplishments, your merit, rather than your birth, was very important to the people who left Europe. That was one of the main reason people left Europe, freedom of religion being the other one. So this discussion of inalienable rights, where we talked about this term that comes from sort of John Locke and Thomas Jefferson, we see that. De Tocqueville recognized this in his travels around the United States, and he noted that this was quite an achievement. And de Tocqueville was also a historian, so he understood the bigger picture of history, and he understood that this was super unique to world history. Because of this idea of not having birth be the dictation of your life, he saw no permanence of class, social class, economic class, however you want to put it. His observations allowed him to see that, interestingly, in a relatively quick amount of time. He commented about the importance of free enterprise, the freedom of property rights, and how these types of things allowed a person to move up in their particular status, whatever that may be. They were certainly able to do that based on these two things. I think these are sort of I've sort of commented about the stool of Western civilization. I talked about, you've heard me say this, about Athens invented democracy, Rome invented rule of law, Jerusalem, Christianity comes out of Jerusalem. You know, there's really a fourth pillar, a fourth leg to the stool of Western civilization, and of course I include the United States in that, and that is, of course, capitalism. And this is sort of what we're talking about. He recognized what he felt were benefits of capitalism. And he thought the acquisition of property was super important. The acquisition of property helps to maintain a civil society. Now, why would this happen? Why? What is the reasoning behind this? What is he? A civil society. Of course, we talked about the French Revolution. We're going to talk about the Russian Revolution, and really, property was pretty much exclusionary for much of history to a small group of people. In this sort of freedom of property rights, free enterprise type system, in systems like that, in theory, almost anybody can gain property. Okay, so how does that help maintain a civil society? Well, de Tocqueville argued that any type of war, particularly internal wars, are threats to private property. And people who own private property, whether it be land or whatever, they don't want it destroyed. So it is in their best interest to keep the peace. I have commented about the French Revolution being a society. France was a society with a very small elite group of people and a very large poor class. There wasn't much of a middle class. I've commented about how ancient Rome, when ancient Rome started off in the Roman Republic era, they had a large middle class and it kept the peace in that society for a long time. And this, I think, is de Tocqueville's argument. If you take a note, take a look one more time, you notice when de Tocqueville was born. He was born while Napoleon was the Emperor of France. De Tocqueville certainly was knowledgeable about the history of the Revolution of France. So these types of things probably resonated with him very much. I think that this next one is, this next couple of points I think are sort of interesting. For example, this one. He comes to the conclusion, basically I would bet. Now, I'm not going to get into the nuances here that I know this, but I'd be willing to bet that de Tocqueville's study of the French Revolution and the history of France just before his lifetime taught him that this great distance between a wealthy class and a poor class and a non-existent middle class led to violence and bloodshed. So he's starting to see what is a relatively new invention in modern times, this idea of a democratic republic, a place where there's rule of law and there is a democratic process of allowing people to vote, creates peaceful nations. All right? And you can see all this, how this is all running together for him. Civil war, Revolutionary War, these are wars of internal strife. They threaten private property. If you allow private property, you don't have this, you therefore have a peaceful nation. And really, these types of nations maintain defensive militaries only. And really, what's interesting is that the United States, after the War of 1812, really decreased the size of its military, if you're familiar with that time period. Now, here's where I think it gets really interesting. And I think that this is super interesting that, to me, de Tocqueville predicts something that will happen in American history. Let's see if you can figure this out. One of the things that he noted, based on this idea, was that if you're some other nation and you want to go to war against a democratic republic, and you want to win that war, you have to beat that nation quickly. You need to do it, basically a quick strike. You need to win the war fast. You cannot have a drawn-out war. Does this sound like something that actually happened in American history? I think if you really think about it, you can guess. And let's go back to de Tocqueville. Why did he say this? Well, he said he was a believer that citizens of democratic republics prefer peace to war. They prefer calm to chaos. They prefer that their private property rights and the things, the methodologies of continuing their lives through the free enterprise, through the freedom of property rights system, that's what they really want. They don't want to worry about these wars, but if they have to, they'll fight. And if you are unable, if you're this other nation and you are unable to win quickly and early, you're in trouble. Because citizens of these democratic republics will give great effort and passion to win the wars they get into. Now, does this sort of sound familiar to you? Does this sound like something that actually happened? I've never, this is my own thing. Okay, this just reminds me of what Japan tried to do to the United States when they attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the start of World War II for the United States of America. This is exactly what this reminds me of, and this is exactly what the Japanese wanted to do, and this is exactly the reaction of the United States. And the Japanese, of course, were overwhelmed by the ability of the production and the ability of the United States to produce not only people that wanted to fight with great effort and passion, but also the amount of stuff that the American military could bring to the battlefield. One of the things that de Tocqueville, so let's move on to another subject here, is this idea of American states, the United States of America. De Tocqueville thought this was a good idea, and he thought that this was a good idea because this was another way, and part of this is the idea of separation of powers. One of the interesting things, of course, of republics and rule of law, particularly ancient Rome, the Roman Republic, and the modern United States Republic, is this idea of three branches. And the three branches, of course, and American students have always understood the idea of the separation of powers. Well, there's really a separation of powers even further than just the three branches of government. There's a separation of power between the three levels of government, the federal, the state, and the local. And he noticed this. And this is something, of course, there's obviously got to be local politics throughout any civilization of history, but generally the idea of a state, the state of Hawaii, the state of Colorado, the state of California, the state of whatever you want to say, this idea was a good way to further separate power. How does that sound? Okay, so now how do we sort of finish this up as we head towards the end of this whole thing? Let's make a couple of notes about why de Tocqueville is important. I'll finish it up with sort of a quote of his from the book itself. What is the importance of Alexis de Tocqueville? Well, he's an interesting person to take a look at and study if you're interested in the ideas of the political spectrum, certainly. So ADT, Alexis de Tocqueville, that's what that means, ADT. One of the things that he does is he warns against what he called soft tyranny. Now, what do we mean by that? Soft tyranny is this idea that there's not going to be necessarily a tyrant, there's not going to be some sort of dictator that pushes it, there's not going to be some sort of massive, quick happening of a person or a personality that comes in and takes over and changes the society immediately. No, soft tyranny is the gradual imposition of more laws, rules, and regulations. This is the type of thing I've talked to you about any society that continually adds laws, rules, and regulations, reduces freedom. I've said to you on many occasions, how can you be more free if the government puts more laws, rules, and regulations upon the citizen? It doesn't do so. So what he means by this is, again, there's not some single individual tyrant dictator that does it tomorrow. It's the slow movement of government in these directions, and gradually people's freedoms wane. He warns that elitists out there in any society, and he's not necessarily talking just about the United States when he talks about this, he's talking about anywhere, is that he really warns that people of democracies, people of democratic republics, often unwittingly, how does that sound? Unwittingly vote away their rights. They vote away their freedoms by giving in to the soft tyranny of a few elites who are recommending that. So he warns of that. All right? Okay, so now, as I mentioned, he's having a bit of a revival here in recent history. He's having a revival. A lot of people are starting to recognize him and read his book. And his book is pretty simple. It's not necessarily a very big book. It's this is a edited version of it. Okay, so it's not super long, but he is popular today with people who believe in a term called American exceptionalism. All right, people today who believe that the United States is a place that is really sort of different from other nations of history. Qualitatively different is the term I'm going to use. People who believe in American exceptionalism believe that the United States is qualitatively different from other nations. How so? Well, look what the United States has done. The United States has done, the argument is, they've helped to spread liberty, democracy, and freedom all around the world. This is difficult to argue. Americans, in most cases, in the American military, have traveled and gone all over the place to try to fight for freedom. The easiest example, of course, is World War II is the best example, where Americans went really to both hemispheres to fight wars to help free people who had been whose nations had been taken over. So this is something, and this is a perfect example. You know, World War II is a perfect example. There was really only one nation that was able to do that, the British to a degree, but really it was only one nation that was able to do this on a global scale. Nobody else could do this. The United States was different. One of the things that I've sort of shown you is how many places start off. You're all familiar with me talking about this. Many nations start off as an oligarchy, ruled by few, led by an oligarch, a dictator, what have you. And for whatever reasons, revolution or loss of war or whatever, these nations try republic, don't they? But invariably, what happens? They can't hold on to their republic. And I've given you examples of this. And France and Russia, Germany, for example, are some of the best examples of modern history, especially France. We've often talked about how France had a king, he gets deposed, he even gets his head chopped off. But what does France end up with? They end up with an emperor named Napoleon. The United States did the same thing. You know, the United States fought to get out from underneath the idea of dictatorship and oligarchy of the King of England, and have tried republic. They haven't lost it. The United States hasn't lost it. So again, this is a different thing than other places in the world, in world history. Now, some critics of American exceptionalism claim and say, well, that's just a way to say that the United States is somehow better than other places. And people who will defend the concept of American exceptionalism say, no, that's not exactly what we're talking about. In fact, that's not it at all. We're not saying that we're qualitatively better, quantitatively better. We're saying that we're just different. It has nothing to do with saying we're superior or better. It just says that we have a different, we are qualitatively, there's a difference between qualitatively different and quantitatively better. And that would be the argument of somebody who believed in American exceptionalism. And of course, as I've mentioned, this guy, Alexis de Tocqueville, was one of these people who started this discussion, and people today certainly are into that. So let me just sort of finish off, everybody, with this brief sort of quote from the book itself. He says, democracy extends the sphere of individual freedom. Democracy attaches all possible value to each man, while socialism, which was how Europe was governed, makes each man a mere agent, a number. Democracy and socialism have nothing in common but one word, equality. But notice the difference. While democracy seeks equality and liberty, socialism seeks equality in the restraint and servitude. All right, there you have it. Here's the book itself, Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. All right, I hope you found that subject interesting. That's sort of off the track and on a little bit back to our sort of discussions we've had about the political spectrum. He's a very interesting read, regardless of your thoughts about the political spectrum. Very interesting story about a young guy from Europe traveling all across the United States to learn all about it. All right, hope you enjoyed that topic. We'll be looking forward to talking to you next time.